Hi, Ethan. Ethan, I found this document on LinkedIn and it's from a company called MK DigiBuild. And it was a big question. It said, is BIM software or a process? I'll put the link to this article in the show notes. But I was curious, have you got a story about whether BIM is a process or whether it's a software?
I think BIM is a process, not just a software, because we need to, you know, people need to contribute along the way for the to get BIM is like what you mentioned earlier episodes. Is BIM. The most important part is information. So to get information, everybody's need to contribute. That's a
Hmm.
process. Mhm. So that's what
Well,
I understand.
there was a recent article or a recent post where somebody said that Revit is BIM, and I made
Oh,
some comment.
I saw
And
that.
because I was reading Chuck Easton's BIM handbook. Now, I know the BIM handbook is old, but actually, if you define BIM, and Chuck Eastman had a definition, it was called the Marxon's definition of BIM. And that is that BIM has to be digital. Okay, so yeah, Revit could be considered to be digital, or ArchiCAD, or Bentley Systems, or Vectorworks. So digital, correct. It's spatial. Yep. So all of those programs are definitely spatial. They're all measurable because they're accurate, so we can use software to measure them. But this one was interesting, comprehensive. So one of their definitions is that it has to be comprehensive, not just design and dimensions, but also includes sequential and financial aspects. Now that means that the BIM model has to tell somebody whether the building wrap goes on before the battens, or whether the flashing goes in before the window, or the window goes in before the flashing. So that needs to be a sequential arrangement. And I don't think at the moment any of our software actually does this to keep track of the sequence of information. But anyway, the next one was the definition is that it has to be accessible to the entire team. Now that means the client, the designer, the structural engineer, the MEP, the contractor, and the owner of the building in the future. Now that to me means that it has to be platform agnostic. In other words, we've got to be able to put that BIM model on any platform anywhere. So I was talking to someone yesterday about CAD software or BIM software, and he was teaching high school students, and he said that he teaches them a particular program because it's platform independent, because it runs in a browser. Now, because
Okay.
it runs in a browser, the students can do it on a Mac, a Windows machine, or even a Chromebook. So they can run their DVC, their digital visual communication paper, with a Chromebook. Now, Chromebooks are what, $500? They're the cheapest laptops you can buy. Imagine being able to run your CAD software online from a Chromebook. So back to the definition. So back to Chuck Eastman's definition, the last thing it has to be is durable through the project life. Now, how do you define project life? Is it the life of the building or the life of the construction? Because if it's the life of the building, we're looking at maybe 50 to 100 years.
Yes.
I don't know if you remember what your phone was like 10 years ago, Ethan.
iPhone.
15 years ago, what was it like? Because the iPad's only been around for 15. But you imagine 20 years ago, what CAD software were we using 20 years ago? What computers were we using? And there are companies that change from a Windows machine to Mac, or from a Macintosh to a Windows machine. How do we make sure that our BIM projects are durable? Most CAD programs can do digital, spatial, and measurable. All of the BIM programs, that's the ArchiCAD, the Vectorworks, the Revit, the Bentley Systems programs, they can do digital, spatial, measurable, comprehensive, and accessible, but durable is still a problem.
Yes.
So to me, BIM is fundamentally about collaboration, which goes against many of the advertising slogans some of these CAD programs are using at the moment. And that's why I replied to that LinkedIn post about Revit being BIM. My understanding is that there are some programs that don't allow you to save in an old version of that program. So Vectorworks at the moment is 2025. I can save back to 2020. Now that's 5 years back. I can't save back beyond that, but if I kept my old copy of Vectorworks, I'd be able to save 5. So if I kept my 2020 version of Vectorworks, I'd be able to save back to 10 years ago. So you can do it if you want. So if I was working with someone that was using Vectorworks 2024, I could certainly save my version back to 2024. But I understand there are some BIM programs that don't allow you to do that, forcing everybody to upgrade as soon as the consultant upgrades. I just think that this goes against accessible to the entire team. It goes against that. It also goes against durability. They're durable throughout the project life. So therefore, you can't claim that some of those programs are actually BIM because they don't allow you to do that sharing. But let's get back to the point. Is BIM software or a process? And you said that was earlier. And how this affects. So I think you told a story in an earlier podcast about working in Singapore and the development, the levels of development, and how the project started off not being BIM, but ended up being BIM, and the client wanted to have as-built and all that kind of stuff. And you talked about the challenges with collaboration with the consultant, and also the definition of what the client really required in terms of those levels of development. And that proves, I think, that it's not just the software that you're using, it's the entire system of building information modeling that has to be thought about as a process. And you should be able to use any software that's capable of BIM to look at that project. So we should be able to use Celebri, we should be able to use other IFC viewing programs, we should be able to take your model and import it using IFC into my software. That should give us that independence. And therefore, my argument is that BIM is a process, not software.
Yes. And have you ever heard about build twice? Build what? The first time you built digital, second time you built actual brick and mortar. When you think about build twice, even though you build in digital, to me, you need to treat as doing a construction work. So the contract must be firm. You need to know what you want, or at least the contract should be called for. And in currently all the contracts, building contracts has been involved, and they support the actual building. But so far, the building contract are not so firm yet for, or what should I say, the digital building process. I think that's the area people need to look for. That's, as I mentioned, it's a digital building project, BIM process, right? So, yeah, I support the idea that BIM is a process. Yeah.
Is this the same as a digital twin?
Digital twins, okay, digital twins nowadays people call for the as-built drawing at the end. So that's the buildings and the final products of LOD 500. So they call digital twins is LOD 500. If you want to go until digital twins, you need to be very firm. As a client, you need to know what you want at the end. Recently, I came back from the conference, and the conference we talk about digital twins. It was one discussions, and the clients, the projects need to hand it over to the facility manager at the end of the project, after the project completed, and the clients take over the project from the contractors, and he will hand over to the facility manager. Then facility managers will start, and let's say together with the buildings and the as-built BIM, right? But at that time, only facility managers know, okay, there are some irregularities between the actual buildings and the BIM model that he received, isn't it? So my suggestions, and it has been suggested for a long time, other people also the same thing. A facility manager should be on board in the construction project as a consultant, one of the consultants, and he should contribute for the BIM process as well, so that that facility managers may not be the facility management company at the end of the project, but that he will be working as a consultant for BIM. So this way, BIM process will be complete, and it will help who to get what information, and people can know the end user perspective for BIM. So that's what I think. Anyway, BIM, go back to the title, is BIM is the process. That's confirmed.
Thanks, Ethan. I agree with you that the facilities manager should really be maybe not a consultant, but should really be involved in the BIM process as soon as you get past maybe LOD 300. Once you start getting into LOD 350, which is the coordination, then surely the facilities manager of the owner of the building should start to look at the model and see what's going on, because the facilities manager could make some valuable contributions to things like replacement of light bulbs, cleaning. I mean, there's some famous stories. The IM Pays Grand Louvre, you know, that pyramid,
Yeah.
that in order to clean the glass, they get rock climbers, mountain climbers to get up there and clean them because it's the only way to do it. Or the other thing where some of the famous airport buildings where they have to close off an area to change the light bulbs. Whereas if the facilities manager was on board earlier, they may have developed a system where they could push a button and the light came down to head height. So you could change the light bulb and then the light would go back up again, instead of having to block off an entire section of the airport to get some heavy equipment in to get up there. So some of these things could be quite useful. And if BIM was a real system, then surely you would get that facilities manager on board. He's going to manage that building later and get his feedback. And the easiest way to get his feedback would to get him involved in the model so he could leave comments on the model, see what's coming up, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Not as a design consultant, but as someone who could then make comments on it. So I agree with you. It's a process. Oh, just in case we didn't know the answer, I did a quick Google AI search. BIM is a process, not just software, that facilitates a collaborative digital representation of a building and its data throughout its life cycle, from design to construction and beyond. Hey, they don't even need us, Ethan. We could just Google it. It would just give us the answer. So don't forget to subscribe to us on Spotify, and that way you'll get notified every time we've uploaded a new podcast. And there's a whole bunch of really cool stuff coming. Thanks, Ethan.
Thank you, Jonathan, and see you next week.
See you next week.